Today we're talking about Chronos Pendant again. Chronos Pendant will receive a buff in the upcoming patch 4.9, and as such there's the question if it's any better as an early game choice and so on. I made a video on Chronos Pendant not too long ago talking about how it is not very viable in early game at the moment, and this video will talk about if the change changed anything about that in a drastic way. What was the change? Chronos Pendant got an additional 20 power. 20 power is not a small deal, is as much as some starter items have. On the other hand, it's not a really big deal either, not a huge deal. It is some extra damage, it will scale well with items like Rough to Hoodie as well, but it isn't crazy or out of this world. And that basically will be the point of this video as well. I do not believe that this item's changes will catapult it much higher in the meta, especially when it comes to early game builds. The reason for this is that the damage still remains somewhat lackluster compared to other items, and there are certain issues with the stats that I'll talk about. So first of all, let's compare Spear of Desolation to the new Chronos Pendant. If we use Chungus 1 and 3 on a Odin level 1, which will reach almost 0 protections when you use Desolation, so this would be almost true damage, then the damage is 324 on the 1 and 161 on the 3. With Chronos Pendant, same thing, the protection reduction will not be sufficient to get the enemy to almost 0 protections, and therefore the damage is only 270 on the 1 and 134 on the 3. The total damage with Desolation is 485, with Chronos Pendant it's 404. What does this mean? 404 not found. No, it means that you have 85 less damage with Chronos Pendant across 2 abilities only. Now obviously not every mage has only 2 damaging abilities, some have 3, some have 4, and as such it is very important to keep in mind just how much you will lose by going into Chronos Pendant early when it comes to damage. There are other benefits to Chronos Pendant, but I don't see any situations where they would outweigh that. You still will not deal significantly more damage with a little more CDR that you have. It's 10% more, it's usually maybe around a second, plus the passive, which is situational as well. And if you look at it directly in comparison with Spear of Desolation, if your plan is to have an extended fight and that way make use of the passive, then Spear of Desolation's passive will trigger eventually as well, because usually in an extended fight there will be some kills or some assists. And then they're basically back to square, except for that 10% CDR that Chronos Pendant has. In addition, the other stat that Chronos Pendant has is MP5, and MP5 just doesn't bring that much value in most fighting situations. What's MP5 good for? Sustain, and especially those characters who can heal themselves can benefit from this. And this is maybe the point where people may be like, I think it's good now because healers can heal themselves more often and the heal is a little stronger. Here's the thing, most heals don't scale all too well with power. You're usually much better off getting rid of Asclepius and just increasing the heal overall than going for CDR in that regard. CDR is better late game when you already have rid of Asclepius, but overall it just doesn't do as much. Obviously, it is worth pointing out though that it makes the heal even to Spear of Desolation, as the penetration doesn't really matter there, so that is one little upside. This MP5 could actually be beneficial, especially early, and here's the big downside. It's not worth it when Sands of Time is around, which just gives a lot of MP5 right off the bat and is much better in that regard, and the item is just too expensive to build it early. 2,900 gold is way above anything you want to invest into early, especially when there are items with price tags like 1,700 gold looking at Dynasty Playtime. And even Spear of Desolation, which comes in at 2,600 gold, is already towards the more expensive end. The extra 300 gold on Chronos Pendant will mean that you get it so much later than the opponent will have whichever item they plan on finishing beforehand, that you just lose out too much. And these stats aren't even crazy. If you look at Pythagorum's Piece, it comes in at almost the same power for 2,300 gold, still has 10% CDR and massive auras for your allies, plus lifesteal and flat mana, which kinda makes up for the lack of MP5. So if you're looking for those stats, then you're better off with that. Chronos Pendant in itself basically creates the issue. A lot of the price is basically justified by the high amounts of stats it has, and one of the stats happens to be MP5. But MP5 on the other hand wants the item to be cheap, so you can use it early and get it early, and that's just not the case. If Chronos Pendant was maybe 300 gold less, it would be a much more justifiable pickup, even if it had a little less power, because then it would maintain its function. There's no doubt that this buff makes Chronos Pendant a better late game item, just a little extra power, there's no harm in that, but it's not really much of a reason to pick it up much earlier in the build. You can consider building it a little earlier now if you feel like the power gives you more and you really need that CDR, maybe around like 4th, 5th-ish slot. But most of the time I think it will still be reserved for the last slot when you already have all your CDR, your pen, your Rod of Tahuti and everything along those lines. I hope that clears up any questions you may have had about this item after this patch. With this, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this and you're not subscribed yet, feel free to click that sub button and maybe the bell, it really helps me out. Other than that, see you for the next one tomorrow. SLOTH, out.